But were you like thinking, hey, let's solve this problem because we know there's a huge opportunity out there? Or were you like, we think we want to start a startup? But like, what was going on through your head?
Well, one of the really, we kind of described the App Store sort of inspiration. The other line of thinking that went into it was EC2, Amazon EC2 launched, maybe it was '07, thereabouts. But actually EC2 was really clunky in the beginning. And I don't know, I didn't find it that captivating. The service that did launch around then was one called Slicehost, which was another of the really early kind of virtualized hosting providers. And part of what was interesting about Slicehost was, before there was this dichotomy in web hosting, you could either have your own like physical servers and manage them and deal with the hard drive failures in them and the UPS issues and all the rest. I remember literally racking servers for Automatic, which is, I feel like I'm describing walking uphill to school both ways, but this was only 2007. Yeah, in fact, I remember the data center, whatever, some aspect of the power supply failing, and I didn't have a car, and so my girlfriend of the time driving me there at like 2 a.m. to fix it. So that happened, and then Slicehost launched not that long later, and I remember using it for the first time, 08, something around then, and so anyway, as I was describing, you had the dichotomy, the dedicated servers, and then you could have shared web hosts where basically you get like a folder on this shared server, but you had very limited control over it. And so, if you wanted to use some different programming language or database or, whatever, you basically couldn't. You were kind of limited to the software that came installed on that server, from the provider. And so Slicehost and EC2 and, these new kind of virtualized hosting providers basically provide the best of both worlds, where you could set it up instantly. They would deal with all the hardware and the sort of arcana and logistics around that, but you had complete control over the server, and you could install whatever software you wanted, and really sort of treat it as your own. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I first used Slicehost, it was just so obviously the right answer, and I wasn't thinking in terms of IT transformation and market TAMs and all this stuff, but it's just like viscerally apparent that this is going to be the future. And sure enough, cloud computing has been one of the most important structural transformations in technology over the last 15 years. And so in payments, you actually kind of had the same sort of bimodal split where you could get a merchant account. This is like your dedicated server where you go to the bank and you fill out the paperwork and it's in Latin and you wait for approval and all this sort of really high overhead stuff. But at the end, you do get a lot of control and kind of a first class experience from the customer's vantage point. Or you could go to a shared web host, so to speak, and maybe that's PayPal or Google Checkout or some of these providers like that existed at the time. And you had very little control. Usually it involved, bringing your customers to some other website, and maybe it was difficult to do recurring payments or to store the credential on file or whatever, but it was at least easy to set up. And so the kind of the idea or the way we sort of framed it to each other was, what if we did Slicehost but for payments, trying to kind of bridge this binary. The first product that we launched, and kind of we can get into how we got to launch and the 2 years it took and so on. But the first product that we launched was sort of was a really low-level API. So in that sense, you had complete control, but that you could set up instantly. And actually, the kind of URL for the Stripe control panel was manage.stripe.com when we launched, and the service is in fact still called Manage. And the reason it's called Manage is because Slicehost's control panel lived at manage.slicehost.com. And we were just really thinking in terms of Slicehost, but for money.
Oh my God. So just quickly, this is a dumb question. I'm so sorry, but were you the first API company?
Twilio, I think, preceded us.
Okay.
So I think,
but they're definitely,
Go ahead.
yeah, as Patrick said, Twilio I think was around earlier, and they did a lot of, they kind of figured out a lot of stuff. But there was really no playbook for API companies at the time, and so we did have to figure out a bunch of stuff from first principles. And, I sometimes joke that I think founders learn too many lessons about, figuring things out from first principles because they have to do it in the early days. And, they get the reward of it works. And so they go figure out, sales from first principles. Like, no, that's an extremely well understood domain. You can actually just use a lot of the industry best practices there. But certainly with building and kind of distributing an API product, and, how you do API versioning and what a great API product is and stuff like that, there was no model to crib from.
And I think the idea of building a product I think there's two things wrapped up in Stripe. One is building sort of an API-centric product. There's also having startups as a core constituency. And I think AWS was the first company to, do that really successfully. But back in 2009, AWS was not viewed as, that successful. I think people thought it was cool and had some neat traction, but it wasn't viewed as this incredibly disruptive business model. And so I think there were many knocks that were kind of legitimate, or at least ostensibly legitimate knocks on Stripe in the early days. And one of them, of course, was, well, you're serving all these tiny customers and companies. And, as a descriptive matter at the time, that was really true. And there was sort of this open question as to, well, how far could one scale with that? To what degree would one, capture their eventual expansion? But Stripe, in addition to being a bet on many other things, was kind of a venture bet on, well, we think this portfolio of customers is going to grow a lot. And obviously in hindsight, that looks obvious. But if you looked at our customer roster in 2010 or 2011, you'd be like, well, I've never heard of any of these things. Dr. Prana, what? A bunch of companies like this.